With this video, I'm going to show you how to make different shapes on the wheel and how you can start to personalize your pieces to make them more unique to your sensibilities. I'm going to throw the clay down in the exact center. I'm hitting the clay pretty hard here, keeping my hands totally cupped around the whole mass of clay and trying to make it into a little gumdrop or a little igloo shape. Pay special attention to the very bottom inch. That's the most important part to get centered, and it's the hardest part for you to get. You can tell here on mine that I'm starting to get a little bit of a splayed out area on one side of my mound. I call this a comet tail. And a comet tail on one side is a sign that the clay is off center. I'm moving it more on center with this patty cake step. So it's the little bit of clay in the comet tail right here that's still off. I'm going to scrape this clean using the square corner of my wood rib tool. I'm going to hold it super firm, and my left hand is going to brace my right hand so that I don't lose my clenched grip on it. And I'm going to come into the side, bottom part of the mound of clay, holding super tight. You want to come into the side and scrape that comet tail off. Now it has a more centered base to the mound of clay. Okay, now I'm going to really center the clay by going faster and using a lot of water, starting with the heels of my hands back at 6 o'clock. I'm going to clench up against the base and gently and slowly bring my hands up, gently release at the top, coning the clay up and working the irregularities up to the top of the mound. Add more water, make a fist with your right hand, and fist it back down into the original gumdrop shape. Hold in this position for several revolutions and then gently release pressure. Let me go over that again. Lots of water on the clay. Hold the heels of your hands locked together. Brace yourself against the splash pan. Come in, hold in this position. Clench your abdomen and gently come up, gently releasing pressure as you approach the top. Get some more water on there. Keep your left hand where it was with the bottom part of your fist. Push down on the mound of clay with your right hand, bringing it back into the gumdrop shape. You don't need to cone it up very high. And you can pretty much leave your left hand in the same position through the entire centering process. It's only my right hand that's moving. Pushing up on the side and pushing down on the top. For this bowl, I'm going to make something a little bit wider. So once I have it centered in this gumdrop shape, I'm going to push the whole mound of clay down a little bit more to start with clay that's a little bit wider at the base, because I want to make a wider bowl. So I'm keeping it in check with my left hand, and I'm applying more downward pressure with my right hand. I'm going to open this up, again using my thumb, embracing my right hand with my left hand on top. I like to start making the hole gently and slowly, get some water in there, and I'm going to just kind of lean my thumb out to the side and start to gradually move it back and forth across the floor, each time swiping it upward and outward in a curve. If I start to get a pronounced ridge like this as I'm spreading the clay open, I'm going to press that back down in and compress it into the surrounding mound of clay. Sometimes when you're opening up over a wide area, you can get kind of a ridge of clay like this, and you don't want that to rip off. I can also do some opening and spreading open the floor using the sponge in my right hand, going outward and then back in towards the bullseye. Spreading out and coming up on a little curve, and slowly in a controlled way going in towards the bullseye. This is opening the floor up, setting the curve on the inside floor, and compressing the clay down in there all at the same time. It's really important that you compress the clay on the inside floor. Otherwise, your pieces will crack across the floor as they dry and get fired in the kiln. So I'm going to go back and forth across this floor at least 20 times. I also want to measure how thick the floor is now. I'm going to take my pen tool and stab it through the lowest point. I'm going to leave my pin all the way pierced through and then run my index finger down, stopping at the level of the floor. And then if I pull it out and extract the pin, I can see literally how thick the clay floor is. That's about 3/4 of an inch, which is perfect. It's really important that you compress the floor well. You want to come out from the middle slowly and go back in slowly to the bullseye. Each time I come across the floor, I'm doing it at the 3 o'clock position. So if this were the center of a clock face, my hand is moving out towards where the number 3 would be on a clock face. And back into the middle, slow and firm, I'm compressing the clay particles down in there. Okay, I'm gonna start to pull the clay up in the air. My left hand is on the inside, my right hand is on the outside at 3 o'clock, and I'm holding the sponge in my right hand. My two hands are joined together with my left thumb bridged across the rim, making a point of contact onto my right hand. So in this way, my two hands are like the two ends of a pair of pliers. Sweep your left hands across the floor, and as they get out towards what is going to be the wall section, I'm going to start to use some pressure with my right hand, and I'm going to come up and out, and now my two hands are pressing against each other. Gently release pressure as you get to the end of each pull, and don't fully release your hand position until you're in midair. I've already got kind of a sharp ridge at the top after just one pull, so I'm going to use my sponge now and compress down and in on that rim because I don't want it to get too thin and frayed up at the top. I noticed there's a little depression that's starting to happen in the middle after that one pull, and I like to go back and compress the floor almost after every pull on the inside of a bowl. Okay, second pull, again, sweep your fingers across the floor. My right hand is on the ready, scraping the bat head at 3 o'clock, and as my two hands approach each other, they're going to exert more pressure. My right hand is picking that clay up in the air. My two hands are directly opposite each other, and as I get to the top section of it, I'm starting to gently release pressure till my hands are all the way off, and I don't release my hand position until I'm in midair. Now the rim is starting to get thin already and a little uneven, and so I'm going to press down and in on the rim, probably at the end of each pull. I don't want that to get too thin too quickly. You can usually tell how much extra clay you have to pull up in the air by looking at the inside of your piece versus the outside of your piece. You can tell how thick it is by comparing the diameter of the floor on the inside to the diameter of the mound of clay you have left on the outside. And I can tell on this that I have a lot more clay down here that I can pull up in the air. It's a good idea to just take a swipe across your piece just with gliding fingertips. Don't even look at it, and just let your fingertips tell you how thick it is right here versus how thick it is in the middle versus how thick or how thin it is at the rim. And you can feel the difference as the wall spreads towards the bottom. You can feel how much extra clay you have down there. And it's exactly that extra clay that I want to pull up and out to make this a bigger piece. For my third pull, I'm really going to focus on pulling the extra clay up in the air, squeezing that thickness in between my two sets of fingers, but gently releasing the clay as I come up. And when I get to the top half, I'm really just gliding. This is all just a very slow and gentle release towards the top. I'm coming outward more now to give this bowl more of a flaring shape. And as I continue to come outward, I know that every extra bit I flare the rim out will make the clay up here thinner and thinner. So I'm going to watch out for that as I finish the shape on this. Here I'm going to use the side part of my index finger a little bit more to sweep across the floor up into the wall on the inside. And it's this side part of my index finger that kind of mimics the shape of the rubber rib that can also give a nice sweeping curve on the inside. I'm trying to have a continuous curve sweeping out from the center area up into the wall. As I come up in the air, I'm meeting the pressure of my inside finger against the sponge held on the outside. Very gentle at the rim. You can use the rib as a shaping tool on your pieces also. I'm going to use it on the inside to help control the curve, especially in the bottom half of the bowl. I'm going to hold the rib in my right hand. My left hand is going to support the rib. I'm going to be working at the 3 o'clock position. I like to take a moment here before I touch the clay and just make sure that I have a good steady grip, that my hand is holding onto the tool, my left hand is bracing my right hand, my knees are in, my elbows are in, and I'm clenched and in a locked body position and ready before I actually make contact with the clay. I'm going to start at about the midpoint and slowly work the tool down and in towards the bullseye. I'll do that several times, starting at the midpoint, coming down and in towards the bullseye with my rib, and then I'll gently release pressure. That's the best way I know to make a controlled sweeping curve across the floor of the piece. I'm going to use the rib on the outside also, and I'm going to hold it in a curve here and gently coax the clay wall into the curve of the rib. It can be a little tricky to figure out how to hold the rib and use it to shape your piece. But your ability to do so will greatly increase your ability to make different shapes and control the surface on your pieces also. With this piece, I'm going to make a simple change in the direction of the rim to give this bowl some extra distinction. I'm going to flare the rim out using the index finger of my right hand. As I do so, I'm going to support it from underneath with my left hand. My left hand is also going to give my right hand a guide to help hold it steady and in place. So this is my starting position. Now I'm applying slight pressure with my right finger. It doesn't take much to make the clay flare out. It wants to flare out. You have to be careful not to press it out too much. If it's thin, it'll want to collapse right here. But just that simple shift on the bowl makes a nice area on the rim where I could maybe pick it up easier. It's kind of like a handle for a bowl. It's also a nice banded area where I can apply some different decoration. I can maybe have a contrasting color of glaze on the rim that would drip down into the other glaze on the inside. I could do some further shaping of the rim using a small part of the rib if I wanted to give it a more pronounced, maybe almost a geometric look. Again, I'm bracing it with my left hand underneath. So that's a sharper look. This can also be a nice thing to bring to your bowls if you're able to throw a consistent size and shape. That can give a nice decorative element when you're stacking them all together. I'm going to apply a final finish to the very edge of the rim with a little bit of plastic. This is just plastic that I ripped off of a kitchen garbage bag. And I'm going to hold it on that edge and smooth and polish any sharpness that might be in the clay right there. I really want this to look finished. I'm applying a slight amount of pressure. To help me get this piece off the bat, I'm gonna take half of my splash pan off. That'll help me get my fingers in there to move this off. Also, before I cut it with my wire tool, I'm gonna slightly dig in with a wood tool down here and scrape away just a little bit of clay, holding steady. That'll give me a cleaner foot to remove this piece with. And it'll also help me when I go to trim the bowl after it's cheese hard. Get a whole bunch of water on one side, and then holding the wire tool tight, you want to cut that water underneath the piece. And you usually have to do this twice to get it to slide on the bat. There it goes. Now I have a lot more room for my hand to slide this off and onto my awaiting hand. To do my next piece, I'm going to sponge off all this excess water that's on the bat head. But this little pancake of clay that's left from the base of the previous one, I'm going to leave that there because that's going to be a great pad that's going to help this next ball of clay stick to the wheel head. Pat the clay in place and then center it by coning up and pushing it back down. I'm going to show how to make a slightly different shape with this bowl. I'm opening it up with my thumb again, spreading my thumb across the floor in a sweeping curve. If I start to get a ridge like this at the top, I'm going to meld it back into the surrounding clay. And I'm spreading the floor open wide, going back and forth across the floor, compressing the floor, setting a nice, broad, wide, sweeping curve down in there, slowly moving back and forth across the floor at the 3 o'clock position. Sometimes I call this step steamrolling. I'm not necessarily digging down any deeper, but I'm compressing, I'm compacting the clay that's in the lower section of the piece. Gently sweep up towards the middle part and back down into the bullseye. Back and forth across the floor, sweeping up into the wall. You want to do this about 20 times on every piece that you throw. With this piece, I want to make a bowl shape that comes out and comes back in. It's not going to be as wide and open as the previous one that I did. It's going to be almost like a globe shape. So with each pull, I'm going to try to get a little closer to that shape. Again, sweeping across the floor, coming slightly outward. And now, as I get to the midpoint, I'm going to start to use more pressure with my right hand. And I'm going to let my right hand dominate over and on top of my left hand and pull the clay back in on itself, still being very gentle as I exit the rim. Give a compressive, smoothing touch with the sponge on the rim at the end of each pull. With this second pull, I'm going to pull it up, make it even taller and bigger, swell it out a little bit more in the middle, and continue to bring it in at the top. My left fingers are sweeping across the floor, and right about here, my right hand is going to start to pick up some of that clay in the air. I'm coming out, 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 and now my sponge is gonna dominate, come on top of my left hand, and I'm gonna pull it in, being very gentle at the rim. With my third pull, I'm gonna shift my hand position to again use this edge of the index finger with my inside hand. Squeezing the extra thickness of clay in between my left hand and right hand, I'm pulling that extra clay up into the piece. Very gentle at the top. I notice on the bottom part of this piece, it has a more straight area down here that kind of reminds me of like a tree stump. And I want to get a little bit more swelling down here. This is the kind of stuff that's really only visible when you lean back or bend over to look at your piece. I'm going to push that clay out from the inside to give it some more volume down there and not have it look so straight. As I push with one hand, I'm meeting that pressure with my other hand to help control the curve. Oftentimes I'll have a shape in mind, and then I think with each pull I'm coaxing it closer and closer to the shape I already have in my mind. Starting to lose control a little bit here in the middle. I'm going to try and even that back up by using my rib. And I'm going to hold it against the side of the piece and gently push the clay wall into it with my other hand. And by holding steady here, I can shore up an area that was about to collapse. And I'm going to continue to bring the rib across the middle belly part of this piece and up across the shoulder. This piece has a really strong shape, and I just don't feel like it ends with a really strong shape at the top. I'm smoothing the rim by applying pressure with the plastic, but I'm slightly digging in with my fingernail on the outside to separate the rim from the rest of the piece. There are all different kinds of ways you can use the rib and use your fingers and move your hands across the clay to make distinct shapes. This piece seems a little too fragile to me to move off of the bat head when it's this wet, this soft, this thin, this large. So instead, I'm gonna leave it on the bat and I'm gonna just let it get cheese hard on the bat. I am gonna run my wire tool under it though, but I'm not gonna slide it off onto another wood board. You can just leave this aside until the piece is cheese hard and you can pick it up without damaging it. And you can just put a fresh bat right on your wheel head and keep working. Throwing rings are a great way to personalize your work and bring a lot of personality to them. Throwing rings are the marks that are directly left from your hands on the clay. Throwing rings can be really personal because they come directly from your particular touch, the amount of pressure that you're using. They often reflect directly the anatomy of your hand, of your specific bones and knuckles and joints pushed into the clay. It's almost impossible to throw on the wheel and not leave throwing rings. Right now, they're kind of subtle on the surface of my piece. And if I use more pressure and maybe come up a little faster with my fingers, they'll just become more obvious. I usually don't try and make them too deep too quickly because if they're done in the wrong way, they can start to throw the piece off center. Sometimes it's fun to start with a very smooth surface. Here, I'm going to erase all those throwing rings using my rib. And then across this smooth wall, I'm going to put one big, deep throwing ring that's going to spiral all the way up the side of the piece. I'm going to use the knuckle of the index finger on my right hand. At the same time, I'm feeling how thick the clay wall is so that I don't collapse the piece by mistake. That's a nice spiral. Now, of course, when I glaze it, the glaze will gather in each divot, and hopefully it'll break on the edges also and do something really interesting as it kind of cascades and pools on the side wall. Looking at the shape of this piece, I feel like I also want to flare it out at the rim a bit more. I like the way the big throwing ring has this expanding, reaching up quality to it. If I can flare out the rim, it might help with that sense of this piece. The inside floor is a nice place to put throwing rings. The glaze is naturally going to gather down on the inside floor, and that can be a nice focus piece for people to look at on your work. To make a really pronounced ring or spiral down in there, I'm going to smooth it out with my rib first. And now with my index finger, I'm going to more quickly make a spiral coming in towards the middle. There. That's a nice kind of a signature mark that could be on the bottom of all of my bowls. I'm asking you to adopt one of these techniques to bring to your bowls to make a series of pieces that are related as a family. Choosing one technique will allow you continued practice with that particular technique so that you'll improve with it over time, as opposed to just trying something different every time you sit down at the wheel. It will also help you develop your own sense of personal style with your work. By practicing a technique over and over again, you'll get closer to making work that truly reflects you, that nobody else could have made, that is more about your own sensibility with the material.